The order was delivered without ceremony, without negotiation, and without the comforting language the palace normally used to soften a family wound. King Charles had signed away Meghan's remaining access to royal residences, private archives, household briefings, and family-controlled collections. But the most devastating detail was not the punishment itself. It was what had forced his hand: a newly recovered set of Diana's private files, carrying warnings that reached directly into the present. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat at Clarence House, the residence used by the king and queen for work, with the directive before him. He read the final page twice. The order removed Meghan from restricted rooms, confidential briefings, protected correspondence, and private collections once reachable through Harry's family standing. These were not symbolic privileges. They were the last hidden routes into the monarchy's personal world, where memory and influence met beyond public sight. The king lifted his pen, hesitated, and signed. A courtier watched him set it down carefully. "This is not revenge. It is protection," Charles said. His voice stayed controlled, but exhaustion marked his face. He knew the decision would look ruthless. He also knew that an unclear boundary could expose Diana's private words to a conflict she could no longer answer. Harry learned the truth through a call from a senior palace secretary. The secretary represented the royal household, the staff system managing the monarch's private and official affairs. As each restriction was read aloud, Harry gripped a chair and stared ahead. "He has cut her out completely," he finally said. Disbelief came before anger, because his father had not called him. The danger now began inside a sealed folder, discovered by archivists cataloging Diana's personal records. Archivists are specialists who preserve important material. The folder contained instructions and a preservation clause, warning that her private records must never become weapons in battles over reputation or royal legitimacy. Meghan's name did not appear. It could not have. Yet the language described a future spouse gaining access through marriage and turning memory into influence beyond crown control. Charles then received a photocopy of Diana's handwritten instruction. He read the sentence about protecting her sons from those who may one day turn memory into influence, closed the folder, and ordered the directive prepared immediately. But Harry wanted one answer: who had interpreted those words? And had William helped use their mother's warning against his wife? The doors had been closed by the king, but the deeper wound would open when Harry discovered that Charles had not reached the decision alone. Behind the official language stood 4 people bound by grief, marriage, memory, and years of unfinished conflict. Charles believed he was defending the dignity of the crown. Meghan saw the order as final proof that she would never be treated as family. Harry felt his father had transformed Diana's memory into a weapon. And William faced the most painful position of all, protecting his mother's legacy, while knowing the decision could permanently destroy his brother's trust. Charles had spent years trying to divide the sovereign from the father, but Diana's files destroyed that fragile separation. The crown meant the monarch's legal and symbolic authority, yet this decision reached far beyond ceremony. Protecting the archive now required him to impose consequences on his own son's wife, and every restriction made the private fracture feel permanent for everyone. Meghan still held no working royal role, but personal invitations had left narrow paths open through family gatherings, private residences, and Harry's remaining connections. The new directive closed those paths. When Harry read the palace summary aloud in California, she listened without interrupting. Then she asked, "Did your father speak to you before signing it?" He said no. Meghan turned away, wounded less by the order than by the deliberate silence behind it. William carried a different burden. In his Windsor office, the prince studied the archival summary and the implication that Diana had feared a future struggle over her private legacy. An archival inventory was a formal list of protected records and where they were kept. He supported sealing those materials, but he refused to let his mother's pain become a public instrument of humiliation. Catherine found him after midnight, with the inventory spread across the table. William did not look up at first. "I am not trying to erase Meghan," he told her. "I am trying to stop Mummy from being used by any of us." Catherine placed one hand over the papers and asked whether Harry would understand the difference. The prince gave no answer, because he already feared the truth. Harry then learned, through a documented palace memorandum, that William had been consulted before Charles signed. Worse, the future king had personally insisted that Meghan never receive Diana's unpublished letters, recorded testimony, or private legal correspondence. He had not requested total social exclusion, but that distinction vanished beneath the shock of secrecy. Harry demanded a direct explanation from his brother. Yet before William could answer, the archivists disclosed that the emergency review had begun months earlier, after one specific request changed everything. What appeared to be a sudden royal punishment had actually begun with one private request, a request that changed the meaning of Diana's files forever. The confrontation did not begin when Charles signed the order. It began months earlier, during preparations for a private commemorative project connected to Diana. A request arrived asking whether selected personal letters, unpublished reflections, and family photographs could be reviewed for possible inclusion. The request appeared respectful. It carried the language of remembrance. Yet one sentence alarmed the archivists, because it sought permission not merely to honor Diana's memory, but to interpret her private views for a modern audience. Harry and Meghan had been shaping a private project about mothers, inherited trauma, and the price of public judgment. Diana's story would form its emotional center, but access to her papers carried strict limits. Restricted correspondence meant private letters and records protected by family authority, legal conditions, and written instructions. Every request needed a clear purpose and approval from those responsible for protecting her sons. Meghan then joined a closed video conference with an archival liaison. She asked whether Diana's unpublished notes about entering royal life could show how little the institution has changed for women who marry into it. The liaison stopped taking questions. He recorded her exact wording in a documented account, ended the discussion without warning, and sent the concern upward before the call had even settled into silence. Meghan felt betrayed when she learned what had happened. She told Harry that she had wanted to connect two women who had endured relentless judgment, not claim ownership over Diana's voice. Harry believed her. He became furious that a confidential question had reached Charles and William, turning his wife's compassion into what the palace treated as a security threat. The request triggered something no one expected. A senior archivist reopened Diana's preservation guidance, meaning the written rules she had left for protecting sensitive material. Attached to an older inventory was an envelope marked for consultation if any relative or spouse ever sought to interpret her private words publicly. The archivist carried it into a secure reading room with two witnesses. He broke the aged seal, read the first paragraph, and stopped speaking. One witness noticed his hand trembling. "This was written for exactly this kind of moment," he said. Diana's warning was direct. No one was to use her private words to justify a personal conflict with the monarchy, and neither William nor Harry should be pressured to release them during a family division. Charles read the documented discovery and ordered an immediate consultation. Meghan's access, Harry's anger, and William's interpretation were now heading toward the same closed room. The discovery had transformed a private request into a question of loyalty, and soon Charles, William, Harry, and Meghan would be forced to answer it face to face. There were no cameras, no public statements, and no advisors permitted to speak once the meeting began. Charles sat at one end of the table. William remained near the window. Harry and Meghan faced them from across the room. Between the four lay a single folder containing Diana's instructions. The confrontation was meant to settle a question about archival access. Instead, it exposed every unresolved grievance the family had carried since Harry and Meghan stepped away. Charles had agreed to one conversation before imposing permanent restrictions. He wanted Meghan to explain herself, Harry to challenge the interpretation, and William to test whether any safeguard short of total exclusion could work. Archival access meant permission to examine protected records, not public material. That distinction mattered because the argument now touched Diana's voice, both sons' grief, and the crown's right to control what remained sealed. Meghan spoke first. She told the king that she had never intended to exploit Diana, then accused the palace of invoking privacy whenever it demanded silence, while releasing history whenever that history strengthened royal authority. Charles listened without interruption. Yet his expression hardened when she said the institution was trying to control a dead woman's voice. Harry turned toward William and demanded an answer. Did his brother truly believe Meghan would misuse their mother's pain? The prince held his gaze. "I believe pain can be used even when the person using it thinks they are honoring it," he said. Harry heard caution. Meghan heard condemnation. Charles opened the folder at last. A preservation instruction was a written direction explaining how sensitive records must be protected after their owner's death. He read Diana's warning about future spouses, media pressure, and attempts to make her private thoughts serve causes she could never personally approve. The silence that followed felt heavier than accusation. Meghan challenged the reading. She asked whether the warning also restrained Charles and William, and whether they were forbidden from using Diana's wishes to justify decisions that wounded Harry. He pushed his chair back, stood, and placed both hands on the table. William stayed seated, but met his brother's eyes. Charles closed the folder in one decisive movement. No one leaves with these pages, and no one builds a public argument around them. Meghan then refused to sign a confidentiality assurance covering future requests, saying it treated her as guilty before any misuse had occurred. Harry left beside her. William expected a narrow archival ban. Instead, Charles asked for a directive removing every remaining category of royal access. The confrontation had ended without reconciliation, and behind the closed door, Charles prepared a consequence far wider than anyone in the room had expected. Charles could not erase a marriage, silence a son, or control what Meghan said beyond palace walls. But within the protected world of the monarchy, his authority remained formidable. He controlled invitations to private royal spaces, access to household-held collections, confidential briefings, and the permissions surrounding sensitive family material. The question was no longer whether he possessed the power to exclude Meghan. It was whether using that power would protect the crown or deepen the family fracture. Charles understood where his authority began and stopped. Public landmarks remained open, and official ceremonies followed separate rules. But private residences, protected collections, and household communications fell under sovereign household authority, the monarch's power to control access within his royal establishment. Meghan was not being erased from public life. She was being removed from channels. Diana's files carried another layer of protection. Legal agreements, donor restrictions, executor responsibilities, and preservation instructions governed who could read them and why. An executor was the person responsible for carrying out wishes attached to private property or records. William and Harry therefore could not be ignored, even by the king, because their mother had placed both sons at the center of any future decision. Camilla found Charles alone after the confrontation. He removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes, before admitting that a total restriction would wound Harry more deeply than any headline. The Queen Consort asked whether he could narrow it. He answered that partial access would turn every invitation into another argument. She did not celebrate Meghan's exclusion. "Whatever you sign," she said, "he will read it as a message about whether he still belongs." William challenged him before the papers were finalized. The prince argued that protecting Diana's archive did not require banning Meghan from every private royal setting. He warned that combining security with family exclusion would look punitive, even if the concern was real. Charles then revealed through a documented private briefing that the archival request had only been the final trigger. Earlier confidential invitations had been followed by public accounts of family exchanges. Charles signed 4 copies. After the final signature, he slid one toward the private secretary, but kept the others beneath his hand. He ordered Harry informed before the directive entered the household system. William refused to co-sign the wider restriction, leaving the decision with his father, though he submitted a separate instruction sealing Diana's unpublished material. By sunrise, Meghan's name was disappearing from residence lists, archive offices, protection records, and guest systems. Charles had exercised the authority of a king, but the first consequences would be felt not in the throne room, but in the ordinary moments where family access suddenly vanished. The new reality arrived through small, merciless changes. A standing permission was cancelled. A private contact stopped responding. A future invitation was withdrawn before it had even been announced. Meghan did not receive a dramatic proclamation bearing a royal seal. She experienced the decision as a series of doors quietly locking from the other side. Each cancellation carried the same message. Whatever personal connection remained between her and the monarchy no longer carried institutional recognition. Palace staff moved quickly. Access systems at Windsor, Sandringham, Balmoral, Clarence House, and restricted royal collections were updated before breakfast. Case-by-case approval meant written permission had to be granted for each separate visit. Even as Harry's guest, Meghan could no longer enter private family spaces automatically, and that mattered because every future gathering could now become another test of belonging. Meghan received the clearest blow through a short confirmation cancelling her planned visit to a royal memorial collection. She read it twice, placed her phone face down, and looked at Harry. They did not just remove access, they removed the possibility of being trusted again. He apologized for bringing Diana's records into the proposed project. She refused to let him carry the blame, but he remained certain that his unfinished conflict with William had helped create the punishment. Household officials then received strict communication rules. Private schedules, internal family updates, and archive correspondence could no longer be shared with Meghan. Any message involving Harry had to be addressed to him alone unless Charles personally approved otherwise. The instruction mattered because it separated husband and wife inside every royal exchange. Sophie felt that separation personally. She had considered inviting Harry and Meghan to a small family gathering, but her office was told that Meghan's attendance required the king's permission. A private vigil meant a closed family gathering, held around a death or memorial, and the directive removed automatic access to those moments, as well as receptions and secure residences. Sophie held the unsigned invitation while speaking with Edward. "Does compassion now require permission?" she asked. He answered that the order left them no discretion. After a long silence, she tore the draft in half and placed it in a drawer rather than the bin. Courtiers warned Charles that the order now looked like social punishment. He refused to narrow it. Then William called Harry privately and admitted the king had gone further than he recommended. That admission did not restore trust, but it gave Harry the first proof that the royal front had cracked. Meghan had been pushed beyond the palace threshold. Yet the decision began to change when the two brothers finally spoke without advisors, statements, or a father between them. The call began with anger and ended with something far more dangerous: honesty. No private secretaries listened. No statements were drafted. William spoke from Windsor, Harry from California, and for the first time since the order was signed, neither man argued through the language of institutions. They spoke as Diana's sons. One believed silence protected her memory. The other believed silence had repeatedly been used to control it. Between those positions lay years of grief neither brother had ever fully surrendered. William made contact because Charles's directive had gone far beyond the archive. He also knew Harry had learned through palace channels that his brother had joined the consultation. A consultation was a formal discussion used before a royal decision, but this call rejected that machinery entirely. No aide joined. No recording was made. Neither man would brief the press. For once, they would speak as brothers, not representatives of rival households. Harry did not soften his accusation. He told William that using Diana's warning to exclude Meghan proved the family honored their mother only when her memory protected palace authority. His voice broke when he said his wife was being punished for recognizing the same loneliness, pressure, and public judgment Diana had endured. William answered with a confession he had avoided for months. Hearing Meghan compare herself with Diana had frightened him more deeply than he admitted. The prince feared his mother's suffering would be folded into a modern campaign before both sons had agreed how her private records should be protected. He supported sealing the unpublished archive. He had never supported removing Meghan from unrelated family gatherings. Harry went silent. The order was no longer a united act by father and brother. That distinction exposed the hidden excess inside Charles's decision. William then read the exact wording of Diana's instruction from the documented archival summary. Unpublished material meant letters, testimony, or records never released to the public. After hearing it, Harry accepted one boundary: those files would not enter the proposed project. William asked him to withdraw Diana's material voluntarily. Silence stretched between Windsor and California. Harry walked away from the phone, returned, and said, "I will protect what she left, but you must stop pretending this entire punishment came from her." The admission changed everything. William promised to ask Charles to narrow the directive, because Diana's warning concerned her records, not every part of Meghan's family access. Yet before the king could answer, details of the restriction leaked beyond the palace. The brothers had finally found one point of agreement, but outside their private call, the world was already turning Diana's sealed warning into the most explosive royal headline of the year. By morning, a private family restriction had become a global argument about race, grief, marriage, monarchy, and the ownership of Diana's memory. Supporters of Charles called the decision necessary protection. Defenders of Meghan described it as institutional banishment, disguised as archive security. Harry's name dominated broadcasts, though he had signed nothing. William faced accusations of guarding Diana's legacy too aggressively. And at the center of every debate stood a woman who had been gone for decades, yet still shaped the monarchy's most painful decisions. The leak spread before Buckingham Palace could contain it. A summary confirmed that Meghan had lost automatic access to private residences, restricted collections, internal briefings, and family archives. Buckingham Palace was the monarch's main administrative headquarters, and its response described the order as a review of private household and archival access arrangements. By refusing to name Diana's files, the statement made the mystery larger. Charles watched the morning coverage in silence. Commentators argued over whether the king had protected records or punished his daughter-in-law. He endured every accusation until the broadcast showed Harry walking behind Diana's coffin. Then he turned the screen black. The image stripped away the language of duty and left a father facing what his decision had reopened. Meghan's advisors urged her to answer immediately. She refused. Any angry statement, she said, would be used as proof that Charles had been right to fear public use of private family conflict. Her silence was not surrender. It was the only power she could exercise without feeding the judgment surrounding her. The pressure intensified when an evening broadcaster confirmed, through a documented account from an archival source, that Diana had left preservation instructions. Preservation instructions were written directions controlling how private records could be used. The words remained sealed, dividing viewers over whether the palace had interpreted them honestly. Harry then released a brief personal statement. He confirmed that he and William agreed their mother's unpublished writings must remain private. Yet he separated that agreement from Meghan's broader exclusion, calling it his father's decision alone. Outside Windsor Castle, crowds gathered as vendors held up the same front page. Diana beside Meghan, beneath the words, "Her words closed the door." One woman placed white roses near the gates. Another held a sign reading, "Protection is not punishment." That evening, a broadcaster called the crisis a battle over whether Diana's memory belongs to her sons, the crown, or history. Charles heard the phrase repeated worldwide and immediately called one final private meeting. The world had delivered its judgment in noise, but the final verdict would be reached in silence, when Charles confronted what his decision had protected and what it had nearly destroyed. The final decision did not restore the family, erase the accusations, or undo the humiliation of Meghan's exclusion. It did something narrower and more honest. Charles separated Diana's private legacy from the wider punishment imposed in her name. Her unpublished files would remain permanently closed to Meghan, Harry, royal advisors, and commercial projects without joint approval from both sons. But the king accepted that protecting those pages did not require declaring one woman permanently unworthy of every private family door. Charles met William alone at Clarence House after reading Harry's statement and watching the public division deepen. Camilla stayed away, and no courtier entered while father and son shaped the final language. An archival order was a binding instruction controlling protected records, while a family access protocol set the conditions for private invitations. The first would remain permanent. The second would be narrowed. Charles admitted the damage, without hiding behind royal duty. He told William that fear of another public breach had turned an archival concern into a judgment about Meghan's place in the family. The prince did not excuse him. He simply insisted that Diana's warning must protect her words, not justify every wound created in her name. Harry delivered the revised terms to Meghan himself. Diana's files would remain closed, but relatives could invite her to private gatherings with the king's approval. She listened, then said, "A door opened by permission is not the same as trust, but it is no longer a wall." Harry understood that she had accepted the limit without pretending the hurt had disappeared. Harry then signed a personal assurance that Diana's unpublished material would never be requested, quoted, adapted, or indirectly used in a commercial project. William signed the same document, placing both brothers beneath one rule. Charles received the assurances, placed them side by side inside Diana's recovered folder, tied the archival ribbon, and kept his hand on the cover before letting it go. Meghan did not regain automatic entry, official standing, confidential briefings, or unrestricted access to royal residences. Yet total exclusion ended. Charles protected Diana's files while accepting that fear had become punishment. Harry defended his wife without abandoning his mother. William guarded the archive while challenging his father's excess. Compassion had not healed them, but it had finally restrained royal power. The private files returned to silence, the palace doors remained guarded rather than sealed, and the monarchy moved forward with one painful truth established forever. Diana's memory could be protected, but it could never again be used to divide her sons.